Oh.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. We are very lucky to have Anne Lambert with us again today to speak about her 3 books that she wrote in her series and her newest one, Whalefall. So Anne, I'll let you start up and tell us a bit about the books.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. Hi, everybody. So I'm here with 4 people, but 5 people if you include Chloe. But I know there's a few online, so it's always a bit of a kind of a strange hybrid thing here. So I'll try and look. So yeah, I'm Anne Lambert, and I'm the author of the Russell and Leduc Mystery series, featuring seasoned homicide detective Roméo and Leduc and marine biologist and CEGEP professor Marie Russell. So I thought what I do a little bit today, what I did in St. Agatha, the last one, is just give a quick overview of the first 2 books, because not everybody has read them, because it is a series, but I'm mostly going to talk about Whalefall today, and I'm going to read from Whalefall today. I'm not going to read from the other 2 books. So because I'm not prepared to do that. But so this is the first in the series called The Birds That Stay. And I started this book when I turned 60. I had been a playwright for 40 years, 35, 40 years. And had always wanted to write a novel, but never really found the time. I had a couple of kids, I had a full-time job, never really found the time to do it. So, but then I ran into a friend of mine, and I had this book in mind for quite a few years and told her about it. And she's an author as well. And she just made me a cup of coffee and told me that I had to go home and start writing immediately. That, you know, I had dawdled long enough. So I don't know why that worked. I really could not tell you why that worked, but it did. So I went home and started the book immediately. I did as I was told. So, hello, hi. So this book, The Birds That Stay, was supposed to be a coming of age story of somebody who grew up in the West Island. You can just move my coat. That's my stuff. Sorry, we're having a little delay.
Sorry.
Okay. So The Birds That Stay was supposed to be a coming of age novel. And the intention at the time was to write about a woman loosely based on me, on my life. I grew up in the West Island of Montreal, and I had a French mother and Anglophone father. And I wanted to write about Marie's coming of age at the same time Quebec was coming of age. So I really wanted to place my character against the backdrop of Quebec growing up, starting with the Quiet Revolution into the election of the Parti Québécois, into the independence movement, and moving forward into the 2000s. And that is to some degree what the book is, although at a certain point I decided I was going to make it a murder mystery. And I was driving here thinking, why in the end did I make these murder mysteries? And I just have to say, absolutely crass, greedy commercialism.
It sells.
Exactly. I was sort of, I asked myself, now who is going to buy a coming of age novel set in the West Island of Montreal, written by a 60-year-old? And I came to the conclusion, not very many people. So with no track record of writing novels, right? I was, you know, reasonably well known as a playwright. But so I made the book a murder mystery because at the heart of the original story, there always was an act of violence that took place on the street that that Marie Russell grows up on. And so I wrote The Birds That Stay. The title, people often ask me about titles. The title I had in my head, it was always called this. My publisher didn't like it very much. They didn't think it was very murder mystery-ish, because it's not. But The Birds That Stay, I like the idea of putting animals in the title. Each of the 3 books have an animal in the title. It's a gimmick, but I like it. So I'm going to continue doing that. And The Birds That Stay represent, well, on a very obvious literal level, the birds that stay right now in the winter that don't take off, that don't go south. And anybody around us knows that those are the chickadees and the nuthatches and the woodpeckers and, you know, evening goldfinches, when they show up, evening finches when they show up, grosbeaks, sorry. And so, birds that stay also though represent the people who didn't leave Quebec, who stayed, who didn't go down the 401 to Toronto or Ottawa, who made their lives here in Quebec with all the challenges that there were for Anglophones in particular, and the economic challenges and the political challenges. And then in the book itself, it also, the title also alludes to the people who kind of stick it out with people. And this, in the case of this book, Marie Russell's mother has to be moved out of her longtime home and into a nursing home because she has Alzheimer's. And so Marie is the one who stays and helps her mother out. Okay, so welcome.
These are the birds that arrive.
These are the birds that are arriving late.
The birds that play.
Picture one, get the snow on
The
your
birds
car.
that shovel.
So in this book, so this book then evolved into, it's easier for me to read the synopses because when I start just telling the synopses, they can become like 8 minutes long. So in The Birds That Stay, Marie Russell and Roméo and Leduc get together to solve a murder in a little village in the Laurentians of Quebec, which takes them on a wild ride to uncover a secret from Marie's past in a quiet Montreal suburb, and then to even darker days in Canadian history. So I have a gentleman here who said he likes books about nature. He does not read fiction, but he likes nature and history. And I think you would like these books because Marie Russell is a marine biologist, but she's also like me, not a real naturalist, but someone who's very much interested in animals, both wild and domestic. And so there's a lot of observations about our natural world up here, especially in the Laurentians. And also The Birds That Stay in particular looks at a very dark chapter in Canadian history that I can't tell you because it's a spoiler, but something that when I was doing the research on this book, I was quite shocked to discover actually about our history and things that are just simply not talked about. So that's this book. So I sent this book to my publisher, to the publisher who then in turn published it, Second Story Press in Toronto. And they amazingly said, we'd like this to be a series. So do you think you have another book in you? And I thought, yeah, I think maybe I do. So I very quickly started writing the second book in this series, The Dogs of Winter. I don't know how many of you have read these, so if I'm telling you things you already know. The Dogs of Winter came out 2 years ago, so the fall of 2020. And this book is actually quite different. So it features the same two main characters, Marie Russell, who is 60, now she's 64, I guess. And Roméo and Leduc, the cop, their relationship continues, spoiler alert, and he's 10 years younger than her. And so in Dogs of Winter, the publisher in Toronto wanted me to call these the Laurentian Mysteries. And I was very resistant to that because I felt that that meant that I had to always set them in the Laurentians. And although I love the Laurentians, I didn't want to be held to that. So this book is primarily takes place in Montreal. Marie lives in the Laurentians in Saint-Lucie-des-Laurentides, not far from here where I live part-time. And Romeo lives in Saint-Jérôme because he's head of homicide in Saint-Jérôme and the district. But this book was a departure in that sense in terms of setting and actually almost everything else. So I'll tell you a little bit more. The Birds That Stay was really an examination of family dysfunction and kind of the secrets that we hold close and that make people quite ill, actually, or both sort of emotionally and physically and spiritually. And Birds That Stay was really a book I wrote, I guess, based on the adage, write what you know. The Birds That Stay is really a book that was very much inspired. I mean, none of these people are real people in my books, but they're composites of real people. And so The Birds was very much about a friend of mine who was struggling with her mom who had Alzheimer's and sort of being the only sibling left in Quebec to deal with taking care of her mother, alcoholism, the things that were very hidden on the street that I was growing up in the 1960s in the West Island when people just simply didn't talk about these things. But it's also about, again, this sort of dark past in Canadian history. So that was the stuff I didn't know, and I had to do the research. In Dogs of Winter, this book was really inspired by wanting, not writing what I knew, but what I wanted to understand. So the Dogs was about, it's a tough one to kind of, because there's a lot going on in this book. I was learning, I taught at Dawson. I retired from Dawson after 30 years of teaching in the English department. And I used to have to go to cross all these homeless people on my way to Alexis Neon to get my coffee. And I always used to pass homeless people and wonder, you know, how was it that these people are living like this? And how is it that I step over them every day? And, you know, for years and years, I gave them money, and then I just stopped because I got tired and I don't know, felt sort of hopeless about it. So I wanted to write about those people, but I discovered that many of the people living near Dawson and on the streets were in fact Indigenous people. And they were in fact Inuit people, and they were in fact Inuit people from Nunavut in northern Quebec. So I did lots and lots and lots of research into how they end up here in Montreal and on our streets living rough the way they do. And it was really a revelation. It was, for me, it was astonishing how much I didn't know, and how much as a society we don't really look at this issue. I know sometimes we feel like we do a lot because now it's on the radio a lot, and now there's the Murdered and Missing Women's Report. But, you know, for years and years and years, this was just something we completely ignored, and would sort of like, and myself included, I'm not making myself out to be some sort of, you know, holier than thou person. I would kind of go like, how did I not know about this? So, and then that intersected with two stories that came to my attention in this, I think it was August 2017. These two young women were found dead, one in Dorval and one near Cabot Square, where a lot of the Dogs of Winter is set. And they were both hanged, and they were both deemed suicides. They were 27 years old. They were both Inuit women, both from, you know, communities in Nunavut, and then found themselves living on the streets. And both cases were not really investigated by the Montreal police. Both were kind of deemed, you know, accidental or suicide. And when I was digging a little closer, it became clear that the Montreal police very often didn't investigate the deaths of marginalized people, especially Indigenous, especially Inuit, and especially women. And so my daughter at the time was 27, and I was horrified that these two women who had as much a right to life as my daughter did, who was thriving at that time and graduated from university and working and living a full life, that their lives didn't seem to matter. So that's what took me to the Dogs of Winter. And so it becomes an examination of homelessness, of the systemic racism in our Montreal police force. And it becomes an examination of gendered violence, which makes it sound really, really heavy, which it is, but it's also quite funny. And it has, you know, lots of, I think, lighter moments. And there's the, you know, the story of Romeo and Marie and Marie's kids and divorce and all the things that we navigate in our lives, trying, you know, environmental anxiety, etc. So in the Dogs, Marie and Romeo team up to catch a killer. You know, I'll read this synopsis because it's just easier. Who's targeting the homeless on the streets of Montreal. The Birds That Stay is set. I really liked writing in certain seasons. This is late October, early November. This is January, February, like really in the middle of a brutal winter. So the investigation is complicated by public indifference and systemic racism. Meanwhile, Marie's star student is the victim of a terrible assault. So that's the other sort of subplot that goes on in the story. One of her students is assaulted by a very well-known, prominent entertainment personality in Quebec, who's based on a real person, but I won't say his name because I don't want to get sued. And then Marie and Romeo have a big decision about their lives together to make. So that's Dogs of Winter. So these books really, you know, have sort of many plots that run through them. And that interests me. I like, you know, I like having several storylines going at the same time. It's a challenge for me as a writer. It's a technical challenge. It's a challenge for my brain. I'm 65 now, so it keeps me on my toes. And I think it keeps the reader on their toes too. Like I've had sometimes online, I'll get people saying, oh, there's too many characters, I can't keep up. But I think, that's okay. When I read books, I have to go back sometimes. Like, think of any of us who've read Dostoevsky, how many times you had to go back and read all those Russian names 8,000 times, and then they all have different names, right? Remember? And so if you go,
Patronymic and the family.
yeah, the family name, the patronymic, and you're going back like, who? And I'm on page like 240. So I think it's okay if in my books, which are not clearly
Lord
Dostoevsky.
of the Rings is the worst.
Oh, those I couldn't read, unfortunately, but. So that's what I was doing in dogs. I really wanted to understand this issue, and I think I did gain a deeper understanding of what was going on. Certainly no solutions, but at least, when you want to look at something, like just look right at it, that's already a start, because then the conversation can actually begin about, how we want to move forward in terms of these issues that we collectively face, right? Clearly. So that was the Dogs of Winter. And then, I figured, I might have another book in my head, and Whale Fall. So this is the one that just came out, which I'll read from today, if you like. Whale Fall was really quite a challenging book in some ways, because I wrote it during COVID, and it was a bit of a hard slog, because as I think COVID was for all of us. I was up here in St. Lucie though, and I'm very lucky to have this quite nice house not far from here. And so I had lots of time. I had at the beginning of COVID, my 2 kids living with my husband and I, and my 94-year-old mother-in-law. Because we were all holed up, up here and hiding out. But I did write this, and it's interesting because COVID was in some ways sort of, sounds terrible, but sort of the perfect for me. That's because this book is about climate change. And it's about the issues that sort of environmental anxiety and the issues we face as we are affected by climate change. That's obviously not all that it's about, but each book has kind of a kind of social and political and historical theme that I like to examine. And in this book, it's definitely changed. So as I was watching it happening around me, right, as we all have been for the last, depending on how long you've been tracking it, quite a few years, right? So I have to say, just as an aside, driving here today in a full winter day was thrilling to me. It's about a 45-minute drive to my house. I was driving along with this big stupid grin on my face, just thinking like, it's snowing, it's winter, yay, because Christmas was so disappointing. And I think I speaking for myself, I don't know that I think I wake up every day with a sense of anxiety about what's happening to the planet and how helpless I feel about doing something about it. And so Whale Fall, although I think it's gonna stop climate change, at least I felt like, well, I was doing about something. I'm looking at something that I know is really disturbing to me, and I want to talk about it. It's I just heard from a friend of mine who lives in Germany, in Lubeck in northern Germany, one of my best friends from high school, and she just read the book. And normally she reads my books right away when they come out, and I was kind of like, you're a good friend of mine, how come you didn't read this in October? And she said, I was really resistant to reading it. And I wrote back and I said, why? And she said, because it's sort of about climate change. I can't face it. I don't want to look at it. And I said, oh, wow, okay. And then she wrote back and said that how it was sort of wonderful for her, because it was very validating of the feelings that she was experiencing now, and the sort of concern and worry that she had. So anyway, so that worked out okay. So Whale Fall. So Whale Fall, so animal number 3, right? And publishers very much didn't like this title, did not care for this title, but we came up with so many way stupider ones that in the end, this was the original title that I had for it, and we stuck with it because they thought it sounded too much like Skyfall, that James Bond movie. But it's actually perfect for the book. So Whale Fall. So what I sort of do when I'm talking about a new book is I kind of ask myself my own questions. I kind of answer them, if that's okay. Because I let people have similar-ish questions. So the title Whale Fall is actually in many respects a much simpler book than either of these, I would say. Plot-wise, it's simpler. It's more streamlined. My son who read it said it's more murdery, murder mystery-ish. These are both of these books, especially Birds of Stay, I'd say, for people who really just want to turn the page, you know, just really don't want any side story. They find especially the Birds of Stay frustrating because there's memory, it's part memoir, there's a lot of examination of political and historical and cultural issues in Quebec, dogs too. And so they just want to, you know, like, I don't want any of this stuff. Whalefall is probably the most like that of the three, I would say, because this is a book about love and revenge. That's what it is, of the human and non-human kind. So the book, the book came to me in a moment about, I don't even know when, 7 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I don't know, my friend calls it COVID time. She just calls everything COVID time. It was 5 years ago. 5 years ago. I was at a protest. No, it was longer than that. It was longer than that. Against the clear cutting of Mont Cup, which is a mountain near where I live in Laurentian. And it's actually the second biggest mountain in the Laurentians. And it's got, I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's got a beautiful centre de plein air, great ski trails, quite a gorgeous steep climb up to the top of Kaikop that with a lake at its bottom, a little lake, and you can go there and rent little chalets and camp there, etc. The backside of Kaikop abuts the Doncaster Reserve, the Mohawk Reserve near St. Lucie. And so for years, Kruger Paper has had a lease on this land, has wanted to clear cut the backside of Kaikop just because they can. And so there's been groups that have been, Protégeons, Sauvons Mont Kaikop has been around for years and have been fighting against this because, amongst other things, apart from it being astonishingly beautiful, the backside of Kaikop is also one of the last habitats for lynx in that area. It's one of, it's very, there's quite a few lynx and wolves who live around there. So I went to a protest, of course, as one does, again, 5, 7, 8 years ago. And as usual, and this is described in Whalefall in ways I think you might enjoy. Has anyone read this book? No. You might enjoy the description of the protesters at this, which is based on that experience. So of course there was the usual, you know, gang of hippies, or, you know, around with the kids and the balloons and the sandwiches wrapped in you know, plastic wrap and coffee, and sort of, you know, protesting this happening. There were maybe a couple hundred of us. And then there were a few pro-development people there too, sort of laying pretty low. And then this helicopter just out of the sky, this helicopter came in and landed on the little beach on this lake. And it was so incongruous and weird because it was such a not a helicopter-y kind of moment. And out of the helicopter steps David Suzuki to lend his considerable reputation and weight and knowledge and, you know, gifts to the support. So he flew in, he was with the young woman. I'm not quite sure if she was his daughter or his wife. I don't know who that was. Made it maybe literally a 5-minute speech and took off in his helicopter again. And everybody was just, you know, it was like sort of this God descending from the heavens. It was I have such a clear memory of it. And I guess at some point I just clocked it. I just kind of went, oh, and just put it back here. So anyway, a few years after that, somebody said, so what's the third book about? And I said, I think it's about the murder of a famous environmentalist. And they were like, really? You know, and I said, yeah, I think so. So that was the inspiration. So in Whalefall, yes, there's a murder of a famous environmentalist. It's not David Suzuki, but because I think that wouldn't be right somehow. So what I was looking at in this book is I wanted to look at how basically we humans devour and exploit this planet, thinking that it's, you know, it's endless source of everything that we could ever want, with no regard for the consequences. And so the thing that the way I chose to look at it was through whales. So the reason for this is, conveniently, my main female character is a marine biologist who happens to be a cetacean expert. She's a whale person. And so this gave me a great opportunity to look at Marie's career and what she did with whales. So whales are, as we know, the canaries in the coal mine. right? Where they go, we will go. When the whales die, it'll be the end of us as well. And so I have as main characters this environmentalist who started as he runs sort of a Protect the Oceans organization, and I just blanked on what it's called. And it's gone. Sorry, it'll come back to me. And it turns out he's Marie's old boyfriend, the first great love of her life. So, and then I got a chance to look at what these whale environmentalists do, these whale savers do. It was a great opportunity for me because I used to work with people who did this and still know people who do this for a living. So I spent quite a bit of time when I was younger in my 20s on whale research boats, running around the North Atlantic and whales and doing work like that. So it was a great opportunity for me. Somebody asked me about murder mysteries, and I was saying, well, it's, you know, and they're how limited they are, how not limited they are in terms of looking at an issue. And to me, I did an interview, I think with the CBC, and I said, well, you know, we're committing a kind of collective murder, aren't we? Really, we are, by just absolutely refusing to look at what we're doing. I just heard this morning on the radio that we're not going to meet those targets that we set for ourselves in Paris. Like, we're not even going to come close, and we're watching California basically, I don't know, disappear.
Float away.
Yeah, so and so I said, maybe a murder mystery is in fact the perfect book, the perfect genre to look at what we're doing collectively as a society. And so yeah, I wanted also the other idea that was really interesting to me that's happened in the last few years, and I suspect to a lot of you around the table, is this way in which we when we find ourselves on the other side of an issue, how completely polarized we become, how tribal we become, and how we vilify the other without even stopping for a second to listen to what the other has to say. And this happened, of course, you know, in the United States with Trump, and it kind of infected the whole world. So this kind of zero-sum attitude towards everything, you know, where we attack other people without even waiting for a second, any hesitation to hear what they have to say. And I really saw this. I've seen this played out around the world, but I saw the possibility of what happened at Mont Kaikop taking place in my book as a way to kind of polarize this community up north. So in the book, there's a mountain called Mont Baleine, which is clearly based on Kaikop. And there are pro-development people. They want to turn it into a kind of Tremblant type resort, which, as we know, sucks up all the business in the area and focuses it all in this one place. And so there are people in the area that are really in favor of this because it's jobs and it's development and it's taxes and it's maybe bringing back people to our villages so we can open schools again. And the other people are against the development. And my publisher, when I was writing the book, said, make sure, you know, the developers aren't evil and all the, you know, anti-development people are good. I said, you know, what do you take me for? You know, I mean, I understand why they said that to me, but and it wasn't insulting, but I think I know how to write, you know, gray areas. And I think what's interesting to me about being a writer is not so much those black and white characters, but those gray areas that we all live in, right? So there's a moment in Whalefall, and I'd read it to you if I could find it, but I won't. I didn't mark it, where one of the anti-development of Kaikop Baleine is sort of saying, well, this is outrageous, you know, we're just going to destroy everything and the Laurentians will be nothing left. And one of the pro-development local guys who runs has a snow clearing company says, he said, yeah, you're really against development when it comes to, you know, things like this that might be good for our communities and bringing and restoring our little village to Quebec, but you're not against it when it comes to clearing a big space, building a big fat house, you know, putting a pool in the backyard, clearing trails so you can cross-country ski. And nature's great as long as it's yours and no one else gets to go there. And I think, you know, I think to some degree that's true. And I think that kind of tension between those of us who come from the city or not from these areas and come up here, and I'm one of them, you know, built a nice house and took a big space, and I have 66 acres of land, and although we don't mind if people walk on it, you know, that we do like to protect our nature, right? So the book looks at that a little bit too. So it's really quite living here in the Laurentians and very much some of the issues that we face. But of course, these are not local issues only. They are worldwide, universal issues, clearly. So yeah, so that was how I came to Whale Fall. And the other thing the book had to be more that was I was really interested in this. Don't you find it interesting? We all talk about things that are wrong and then don't really want to sacrifice anything to fix it. You know what I mean? Like we're like, climate change is terrible. I was just thinking about this later, driving my car here, you know, just I don't know how much I'm willing to sacrifice to fix anything. I mean, honestly, I don't know. You know, I don't know. And I think that's part of the problem. I think part of it is that it's also feels so much bigger than all of us, and we don't really know what first steps are. We know something has to be done, but we don't really know exactly how to move forward. So I wanted to look at that as well. And so some of the discussion amongst the characters in Whale Fall does address that, does sort of look at what would you be willing to sacrifice? Would you put your body on the line for it? You know? And the main character, Magnus Sørenson, who's Norwegian, he's a big sort of eco activist, and he's an eco celebrity is what he is, like Greta Thunberg, like David Suzuki. So that's those characters. The other thing I wanted to look at was I have recurring characters from book to book, and one of them is a man named Louis Lachance, who is Marie's amatufar up here in Saint. He works a lot of the Yankees who come up and, you know, opens their houses on the weekend and fix a screen and stuff like that. Well, Louis in Whale Fall gets moved into a nursing home in Saint Lucie, and it turns out that Marie's mother is there as well. She's been taken out of a home in Montreal and brought up here, closer to where Marie lives. And so there's a whole subplot involving the two of them that I think I very much enjoyed writing. They're in their 80s, late 80s. So yeah, I wanted, because I was thinking about, of course, the terrible things that happened here during COVID in our seniors' residences, and how we, you know, seem to, in a way, have sacrificed our elderly during COVID. So that's also part of the book. And again, it's not as depressing as it sounds. There's moments that are actually I think quite funny, and humor is important to me. It's not, it's quite important. So, and all these characters, like there's no real, in this book in particular, there's no real bad guys. Like there's everybody, everyone is flawed. You know, everybody has challenges. Everybody is trying to navigate their lives. So that's it for, I think, for Whale Fall. I'd be happy to read a little bit of it to you if you like. Would you like to?
In the chat, if you're
Oh,
willing to
sure.
answer them.
Absolutely.
I have one question. What does revenge of the non-human kind mean?
Non-human animals?
You said revenge of the human and non-human kinds. They want to know, what does the revenge of the non-human kind?
As in non-human animals. Human animals and non-human. Right? So Marie in the book is writing a book about revenge. And she's just clocking stories of revenge. And one of the ones she tells is these beavers, which actually happened to somebody I know. They went, so I hear stories and I just stick them in my books. I heard a neighbor up in St. Lucie, they on Lac Brûlé, they had beavers, you know, building dams and annoying them. Now we know what we're not supposed to do that with beavers now, right? Our whole, there's been a tectonic shift in how to approach beavers now. It's okay. We only figured it out 50 years later. Anyway, so these beavers were building a dam. They blew up their dam. They got rid of the beavers, and then they went to Montreal. This is a true story. And
The beavers went to Montreal.
no, the beavers stayed here. And the family they went back to Montreal. When they came back up, the beavers had cut down every tree around their house. Yeah, one story. Then there was the woman. It was
Is that true?
that is a true story. Lac Brûlé, true story. My neighbor on Range Road where I live told me that. I was like, yeah, it's going in the revenge book. Then there was just these stories, like there was the otter, the woman up here. Remember reading about the otter who attacked a woman in one of the lakes up here? Yeah, attacked badly, had to go to the hospital. An otter. anyway, so I was like, okay. Then just these odd things that are happening around the world with whales off the coast of Spain, killer whales attacking boats. This is unprecedented behavior, unprecedented, doesn't happen. So that became, as I was reporting these, I was like, oh, okay, so, you know, then of course, there's the biggest act of revenge, which of course is COVID, right? COVID is a zoonotic disease caused primarily by habitat destruction, where the disease has jumped the species barrier, right? So now we are getting these diseases that we haven't really seen so much before in ways we haven't seen before. And I think for a lot of people, you couldn't help but see COVID as but an act of nature's revenge. Okay, really? This is what you're going to do? Oh, I'm going to get you this time. And so it became for me also a metaphor that I wanted to look at. This book does not take place during COVID, though. No one's masked. My next book does, though. It's going to be a real COVID book. So yeah, that's ultimately, what was the question?
You answered it very well. And the next question was, what will animal number 4 be? So you've just said you have a next book. So the question was.
I do. I don't know what it is. My son who lives in Verdun said it should be the Bears of Verdun. And I said, are there bears at Verdun? I don't think it's going to be the Bears of Verdun, but I don't know. I actually don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But I do have book 4, like it's starting to take shape now. It opens in a emergency ward at a hospital in Montreal.
Then it should be bats.
Bats.
Chickens. Oh.
Chickens.
Bats, they believe that SARS, MERS, COVID, all originated with bats, and they expect the next one will come from a bat. Transferred to something like
Yeah.
pangolin.
Now, the pangolin thing has been discounted.
It wasn't from the pangolin, it was from a bat to a, but who knows? But anyway, the bats of Southeast Asia are absolutely crawling with coronavirus.
They have lots of viruses, and it's believed because their immune system can tolerate.
Yeah.
It's when people capture them and take them into live markets.
To wet
in
markets,
Wuhan,
yeah.
and mix them with other animals. That's where the problem is.
But again, I don't mean to be like completely literal about it in that sense. It just, COVID seemed to me to become, I think a lot of us were feeling, I think the experience of COVID intersected as well with our anxieties about the environment, and it just, one seemed to feed the other. And it did seem like, to me, like the ultimate act of nature's revenge. And so it worked very well in the context of this book. So that's why it's of the human, because there's human revenge in this book, and the non-human kind.
What's the title referred to?
Whalefall?
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. It was on my list.
I asked you that about the other books.
Oh, you did? Okay. So a whalefall is an actual event. And so whales, when they die, they can either sort of bloat and float to the surface. That's one possibility, but sometimes they sink. And when they can go to a depth of 1,000 meters. And what they do is they create a local ecosystem where the animals at 1,000 those depths can feed off them for decades. I'm just going to say that again. They can feed off a dead whale for decades. I find that astonishing.
Mostly hagfish.
Yeah. Decades. So for reasons I can't explain to you, for spoiler reasons, whalefall, that the idea of a whalefall, an actual whalefall, it has significance in the book, which you'll understand when you read the book. Yeah.
This might sound silly, but why are we so concerned? I'm not saying anything. Why are we so concerned about animals now? You think about the past in World War I, for example, the Canadians shot about 2 million horses. At the end of the war, it just killed about 2 million horses. Nobody cared. And we quite rightly are concerned about animals, but why suddenly are we concerned? I mean, cowpox often led to smallpox in the 18th century. People realized the fleas, the rats, Black Death. But now we care. I mean, children have always cared about animals. When I used to teach, I used to show them, I didn't show them dead soldiers, I showed them dead horses, and they'd cry. And we had debate about conscription. Every class voted to have English Quebecers, they all voted for conscription. No class ever voted to conscript horses, but they did conscript the horses in World War One. But children have always cared, why do adults suddenly, yeah, we used to wipe out beavers, I happen to be Scots, we wiped out everything.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
they
you did.
wiped out each other as well as that, you know,
Yeah.
they really did, but why now? Why are we caring about the beavers? I mean, they hunted species of beavers to extinction. The buffalo, or the bison rather, you know, they were wiped out. Nobody cared. Why are we caring now?
Because we see the consequence.
We're smartened up.
Yeah,
Are we? I don't think we're any smarter than people.
Well, the American Indians,
Well,
okay, I would hazard a guess.
No, I mean,
Yes, well, I think
it's a serious question. I've often wondered, why are we caring
That's an
now?
interesting question.
the indigenous people would have cared and would have been horrified to see the country move from their sustainable way of life to our extractive way.
Over they slashed and burned, the Iroquois, they burned, and they had to move every 10 years or so. They should-
Sure, but they were not that numerous and. But that's not the point. The point is we come up here and we love our beavers and our birds that stay.
But why? Why is it society?
well, I think it's actually, it's a really good question, and I think it is, I think it's, as this gentleman said, I think we got smarter, we evolved. You know, I think evolved into an understanding that we're not, this idea of human manifest destiny, and we just rape and pillage everything we could possibly take. That already was shifting when I was a kid. It was already in the 60s and 70s. There was a different attitude.
It arose in the 1960s with the beginning of the environmental movement.
Yeah,
And things on TV like Walt Disney, which I'm not a fan of. But seeing nature programs on TV, people never saw footage of lions attacking antelope, for example. And while you might feel sorry for the antelope, people never saw that. And
It
it
is
made
so
them
hard.
appreciate the way nature works.
No, I don't think, they had horses, they used to beat horses to death in the streets of London.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean.
but your point is a good one. Look, I can watch something on, I'll watch a murder mystery on Netflix or something. I'm a big fan, I write murder mysteries, so I watch them. If there's any chance that an animal's gonna be hurt, if I'm watching with my husband, I go, okay, just, tell me when it's over. Whereas I can watch a human being
That's right.
murdered. I don't seem to care at all. I'm not sure. I don't know what that says about me. It's probably not a very good thing, but I think a lot of us are like that. And I think it's because there's a perception somehow that animals are really not, participants in their own destruction. I mean, I think that's really ultimately,
They have an innocence about them.
there's an innocence to them. And of course, anyone who's really watched them in nature knows, well, they're pretty brutal out there, but
Yeah, but that's
Um,
survival.
that's survival. Yeah.
Survival.
That's
They
their
don't
instinct.
hunt other animals with weapons.
And I think the other reason why, I think I mentioned at this last reading I did in St. Agathe, I think the next revolution is that animal revolution. I think we are completely shifting our attitudes. It also is coinciding with research into animal behavior. We know so much more about them now. And so we know that, they are sentient beings. We know that, there's a kind of intelligence that lots of species have that we have not even recognized until quite recently. That there's cooperation, there's this whole person who's been studying trees. Now, some of that's been a little bit debunked, but this idea that trees communicate,
Oh, yeah.
right? This is however much of that is true, it's.
No, it's true. It's just that the way it's written, it sounds a little bit anthropomorphic.
Yes, and so, all the scientists I've worked with, like I remember I used to work, when I used to go out in the North Atlantic with my buddies, we used to study finback whales who are in the world of whales kind of boring. They're huge and they do this. That's what they do. They don't fluke up. They don't lift those beautiful, pretty flippers like humpbacks do. They just don't. They're just like big sea cows. That's what my friend used to call them. And they were so resistant to any kind of anthropomorphism. Like this is anathema to a scientist, right? But of course, we can't help it because we are so self-obsessed. We like to see them through the filter of our humanity. But I think that's a good question. I think it's the next big change that's coming in our world, if we make it that long,
It's just changing. I mean, in the 1800s, the SPCA was formed in England.
Oh, yeah.
And they went against the beating of horses and horses working in mines and dogs.
More lushes. And much, right? It's finished.
They're in Saint Sever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So is there another question that anybody would like to ask, or anybody here? Would you like me to read something?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Okay, so well, what's the time? Chloe? Oh, okay. We're okay? Yeah. Okay. Just wondering, what would you like me to read to you? Like the
The gory bits.
the gory bits? No, I can't do. See, that's the problem with murder mysteries. I can't. Oh, I can, how about this? I'll read you chapter 2. How's that? So this is not murdery at all, but it's Marie, a memory of Marie's from the past. Okay. So yeah, okay. And it's called A Memory. She had never felt alive, so fully and completely a part of this planet, not on it, not of it, not beside it, but in it. The morning had not begun with much promise, although the sky was a clear, deep blue with no cloud threatening from any direction. There was a good breeze and a 3-foot chop on the water. They had left that morning at 6:30, right after a hearty breakfast. She was the newbie here, on loan from the Monterey Aquarium, where she had done her graduate fieldwork. She had loaded up on as many layers as she brought with her, because this was the North Atlantic, not the milder waters of Baja, Mexico she was more accustomed to, even though she was a Canadian and used to brutal winters. It didn't matter. She was cold within minutes of leaving the dock, and now after 5 hours of bouncing up and down on the ocean in a 16-foot rubber boat, she was frozen. She could barely move her lips to speak and was not sure she could open her hands enough to manipulate the camera slung around her neck. The project ordered the intern to turn the boat one more time to the south. A lobster fisherman had seen a pod of whales feeding there earlier that morning. He announced over the whine of the outboard motor that they would try their luck there and head back to the research station for lunch if no whales materialized. She glanced at this man from behind her fleecy jacket pulled up over her nose, now numb with cold. He had warmly welcomed her to the team, and unlike almost every other man with whom she'd worked, he had not immediately demonstrated his superior knowledge and experience to her. Instead, he was full of questions about her work, her discoveries, her team. He made her feel like she was the only person in the boat who mattered to him. The evening before, during their first get-together of this project, he'd opened a very good bottle of wine over supper, which, unlike every other man she'd worked with, he had helped prepare, drank more than half of it, and fell asleep on the ratty sofa in the common room while everyone else argued over what DVD to watch that evening. She had listened while his team discussed him reverentially. It was clear that he was the sun they all revolved around, and each team member lit up whenever he shone his light on them. But he didn't seem to seek this or expect it. There was one other surprise as well. She had never felt much attraction to blonde, blue-eyed men. It was, of course, irrational, but she always assumed that they were callow and entitled. She had always preferred hirsute, dark-haired men to men as pale and hairless as a piece of cheese. This man fell into the latter category, but it didn't matter. He was gobsmackingly beautiful, with a careless sexual energy that she assumed everyone felt, female and male alike. Suddenly, the boat lurched as the spotter shouted, "Blow!" The driver curved the Zodiac in a wide arc as she sped toward the white puff on the horizon. The spotter peered at the horizon through the binoculars. "I think it's Betty. I wonder if she has a calf." The driver skillfully pulled up parallel to the whale and put the boat in neutral. No matter how many times she had seen one, a new calf was always a thrill. But despite their hope, there was no calf with Betty or whale number 455. As they watched from a safe distance, the whale lifted her 15-foot white flipper out of the water like a giant featherless wing and smacked it down. Then she rolled onto her back and looked over at the boat, which bobbed like a toy next to her. Marie tried to get her hands to thaw long enough to snap some ID shots of the whale's flukes, but her fingers were stiff with the cold. Suddenly, she heard a huge exhale, and a watery, fishy mist engulfed her. Whale snot. A second whale came so close to the boat that she could practically see inside one of the blowholes that opened like giant nostrils and then closed again as the whale flipped her 10-foot tail up and smacked it on the water. In quick succession, Several more whales appeared. They were in the middle of a pod of humpback whales feeding. They hadn't meant to get so close, but the whales had surrounded them. The water was churning with tons of whale, their flippers whitish green under the Atlantic blue, the fringy baleen plates of their mouths opening and swallowing the hundreds of herring that frantically tried to escape. She was snapping ID photos of their flukes with the unwieldy zoom lens camera as fast as she could, while Magnus prepared a DNA dart gun with deft hands in the rollicking dinghy. He glanced at her for just a moment and winked. Marie knew that this was a man with whom she could fall dangerously in love.
Good stuff.
So that's chapter 2. That's Marie and Magnus. So yeah, so that was very much obviously inspired by some trips out on the ocean with
Not
taking.
inspired by Richard Sears, is it?
So
Do you know Richard? Sears?
I do know Richard Sears. I spent a week out in Mingan Islands a couple of years ago doing research for this. I don't know him well, but I do know Richard Sears. My buddies know Richard Sears very well. No, he's not. I mean, so there's a whole sort of category of older whale researchers that are all men, because the field is young, right? Whale research is really dated really to the 70s, 60s and 70s. And in my experience, they were all older men who, you know, were quite accomplished, and they were always surrounded by bevies of beautiful young women who want to change the world. That's actually a significant part of the plot of this book. And so, and when I went to Richard Sears, although he wasn't there, he was in the Azores studying blue whales. I witnessed the same thing, these gorgeous, and I mean gorgeous, you know, beautiful, accomplished, brave, committed, passionate young women working for these old silverbacks, as we call them.
Groupies.
Well, they're not groupies because they're in the sense that they're trained. You know, a lot of them are doing their PhDs or whatever in marine biology or whatever their area of study is. So they're not groupies in that sense at all. But they will, you know, this is where the opportunities lie, right? To go do research on these boats. And Richard Sears is basically the guy who basically knows everything about blue whales in the world. And up in the Mingan Islands in northern, however, they're not there anymore. So
Okay.
here's something that's pretty awful and interesting. The blue whales are gone from that part of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They've moved to just north of the Gaspé. So I went up there to look at blue whales and they were all gone. Where I used to go off the coast of Bar Harbor in the Gulf of Maine to study finback whales and humpback whales, they're gone.
The food has moved into the Gulf. That's where the right whales are.
The food has moved, so they've moved. So to my shock, someone told me recently that the little island that I used to go to called Mount Desert Rock no longer has whales.
I wonder, you say it's a rather young study, okay, it's only since the 70s, so this evolution and moving around their geography probably has gone on many times over the centuries and beyond. Well, we don't know.
We don't know, but the suspicion is not. The suspicion is that you know, that because of the warming waters, the food source is shifting around now.
So why would they come south? Because of the warming waters, where it's warmer?
Because for whatever reason, the fish have moved. They don't quite know yet what the connection is, but the fish have moved.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
but
It's the copepods, and in case of the northern right whale.
It
They go off
depends.
the Gaspé to feed on the cope, and there was a huge bass fishery for northern right whales, as well as bowheads,
Mhm.
in the Strait of Belle Isle.
Yeah.
And Red Bay, Labrador is a archaeological site where the bats in the 1400s used to come and
Yeah,
hunt all the whales. So the whales have been in different places historically.
they have been absolutely, but populations that, to their knowledge, have been there for many centuries have moved. Now, whether they'll come back, who knows? I mean, right now, there's less than 400 North Atlantic right whales left. So, you know, that's what's left. And that's been the case since I was sort of hanging out with whaleheads. There was always, they're considered technically extinct, but they're not extinct yet because there still are, I think there's just under 400 now.
Yeah,
So-
they're slow moving and they seem to be affected an awful lot by fishing.
Yeah.
The ropes and the.
And actually, a friend of mine who was a consultant on the book, runs a, you know, there's ropeless fishery, right? We can fix this. But, you know, it's just the will, it's like the political will to make this stuff happen. Ropeless fishing, they just don't, they have other devices that they use, because that's what they get caught in. When I was up in Mingan, a right whale got caught in crab fishing nets.
Yeah.
And, you know what, I have to say, interesting though, as soon as the word got out that whale was caught, that entire part of the Gulf of St. Lawrence was closed. Like that, it was quite impressive, I have to say. So people are reacting, it's just, we're a
Because the
little,
Americans are threatening to block our fishery imports if the Canadian government
Yes.
does not change the regulations.
yeah, and they have.
Well, like out west where there are all the whale strikes,
Yeah,
that poor humpback lady
Yeah.
who swam all the way to Hawaii with only her fins because her back was broken.
yeah, but I mean, you know, look, we had a whale in Montreal, right? I
Yeah.
mean, what's
That's right.
going on here? We got a whale down in the harbor in Montreal. One of the stories, was that I put in Whalefall was that whale off the west coast who lost her baby, and
Right.
she swam like 1,700 kilometers carrying her calf with her, a dead calf.
Yeah.
But in the book, I said, you know, she's pregnant again, like she got pregnant again and had successfully had a calf. So, you know, we have to, I just heard a climate change guy this morning sort of saying we have to have hope because we have to, but what I'll do now, right? We have to move forward. So, so yeah, I thought maybe I'd read one more passage, if that's okay. That's not, yeah.
Who doesn't, I mean, who wants to hunt the whales? I mean.
Nobody hunts whales anymore, just
Even the Japanese.
Japanese.
the Japanese do in the Southern Ocean, the
Icelanders.
Norwegians do, the Norwegians and Japanese, basically.
But why did they do it?
Well, they only hunt, so the only whales they hunt are minke whales, and there's lots of them, that's why, there's lots of minkies in
And
there.
the whalers of Beckwith.
What?
Oh, I
It's a
don't-
little island in St. Vincent in the Grenadines, it's one of the Grenadines, and they have a tradition going back. They're allowed under a UN convention that allows
Oh.
indigenous hunting of, and they go out in 22-foot sailboats. And,
Wow, okay,
What are they hunting?
They're humpbacks. And they almost never get one, but when they do, there's a great celebration, and then they pull it up on shore and they take every last ounce of it.
yeah. I
This
mean,
is
the
in
truth is
Caribbean.
about whale hunting is, you know, humpbacks, they started hunting with humpbacks in the 1970s. Largely because of a guy named Scott Payne who recorded them singing. And people, you know, again, you anthropomorphize them as soon as we can relate
And
to
Judy
these animals.
Collins.
Yeah, so there's no great hunt now. There's the Japanese are still running around the southern seas. They're called research vessels. But that's not what they're doing. The Norwegians for sure still hunt.
And apparently the Japanese can't even sell the meat back home. Nobody
Yeah.
wants it.
Yeah.
But it's their tradition. so-
Yeah, I've never really, look, they eat whale in Norway, they eat whale in Iceland, you know, these are consumed. But
The
they
young
are,
whale is actually very tasty.
yeah, I've never eaten whale.
Tastes like filling. I've eaten one.
Shame.
Well, I was stranded on Lambert and we sent a team to do a necropsy and so it was so fresh. I thought, well, I'm gonna take about 10 pounds and see what it tastes like.
There you go.
I mean, it was already dead, fresh dead. I
Mhm.
didn't kill it, but it's already fresh dead. It's like picking up a roadkill deer.
Yeah.
As long as it's fresh, why not?
Has anybody got a question? Okay, so
Evil.
I thought I'd read to you something, this isn't very murdery mystery-ish either. I'm probably giving the wrong idea of this book, but I thought maybe you'd appreciate this because you'll hear why we're given today. And this is just a short passage. Wait a second, is this what I want? Just a minute. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, this is chapter, I don't know, 8. This is Marie, just the night after her wedding to Romeo. And so it's her first ever honeymoon in theory, and the whole house is still sleeping, so she's stepping out. Marie towed her feet into her flip-flops and went out the door. Dog, that's her dog. Dog hard on, the dog's name is Dog. Dog hard on her heels. A slight breeze lifted the branches of the aspens and balsams lining the forest path to her little lake and set them in gentle motion. The sky was now almost cloudless, an intense blue that promised no change for the next few hours at least. Marie stopped to listen to sort out who was singing that morning. The oven birds were teachering insistently. She could just make out the ethereal fluty notes of the wood thrush echoing deeper in the woods. Then the ecstatic trill of the winter wren, a bird that could sing harmonies with itself. She heard the squeak of nuthatches, a squawking baby blue jay, and high overhead the iconic shrill whistle of a broad-winged hawk that would send the songbirds fleeing for cover. There were too many warblers joining in for her to identify, but she could hear the black-throated green warbler singing the 5 opening notes of Into the Woods that Marie was pretty sure Sondheim had heard and as well and borrowed. What a sensory orgy July is in Quebec, Marie thought. Everything was so erotic. The juicy grasses, the coy wildflowers, the waving ferns beckoning her down the trail and closer to the lake. The raspberry bushes were heavy with ripeness. The blueberries were still 2 weeks away yet, but so full of the tiny green berries that she expected a spectacular harvest this year, if she got to them before the bears did, and Dog. As she approached her dock, she realized Magnus had to be awake. The birds were so loud he couldn't possibly sleep through their morning chorus. But as she glanced at the clearing in the boathouse, by the boathouse, she could see the hump of his body still swaddled in the blankets from the sofa, and no movement at all. She dropped her towel on the dock, kicked off her flip-flops, and without hesitation, dove in. Dog jumped in next to her 1 second later. Nothing on this beautiful, miraculous planet was more delicious to Marie than a swim around the lake on a July morning. The sun was still rising, and the water sparkled and danced in its light. Marie knew every little detail of its shoreline the way she knew her own body. The alder tree the kingfisher liked to fly out from, dive bomb her, and then fly back to and chide her for being there. The cove where the loons hid their nests in a tangle of long grass. The pile of rocks where the merganser mother and her dozen ducklings camouflaged themselves from predators. The inlet where the snapping turtle lurked, and the stock-still heron waited patiently for a fish. Suddenly, a horsefly buzzed by her head. They were aggressively territorial, and Marie had invaded his space. She swam underwater to lose him, and when she came back up, Dog had decided he had enough of a swim and was heading back to shore. He would frantically follow Marie and make sure she was still alive from there. As she came back up for air, 2 loons appeared just ahead of her. At this point in the summer, they were so used to swimmers and boats they were practically tame. The male cooed softly to the female, reminding her that Marie was nearby and reassuring her. Marie was always anxious about the return of the loons every May. She felt if they didn't return, some terrible thing could happen. For years, she and Daniel, that's her ex-husband, saw themselves as the loon pair, crazy and mated for life. The second half of that statement proved itself wrong, and Marie had recently learned that loons were more like her and her ex-husband than she had thought. If a chick was not produced, they often split up and looked for a more fruitful partner. And if an invading male came into the wrong territory, he could be stabbed in the heart by a rival's sharp beak. This pair hadn't had no chicks again this year, but as Marie began a leisurely breaststroke through the dappled water, the 2 loons were now peacefully preening. There's more of that. It's her big swim around the lake. So
Yeah, the great thing about loons is when they go south for the winter, the ladies go to one place and the gentlemen go to another, so you don't have to spend all year with the guy. Yeah.
So that's, anyway, I thought you might appreciate that today. It's Marie's. So yeah. I think, I don't know if there's questions that you'd like to ask or.
Yeah, I have a question about the availability of the book.
So the book is all the books are available online. They're all available as ebooks. You can purchase them online from Amazon or Indigo or any of those places. They're available in most bookstores in Montreal. I'm not sure what the status is at Indigo now. Don't get me started. Yeah, they're pretty easy to get, most places. Where are you? Person who's asking this question. You're in the little owl thing in front of me. Anyway, they're very available, and they're available as audiobooks as well. Reading's not your thing?
Who's reading the audio? Who's narrating? Yourself?
I am.
Oh,
Yeah, and I just finished Whale Fall 3 days ago.
all right.
Yeah, just did it. Yeah, my publishers asked me who I saw as the narrator of my books, and was there an actor that I wanted them to hire, and I gave it some thought. And I didn't actually give it that much thought, to be honest. I felt like it was me, because there's quite a bit of French in the books. And I was concerned that they would hire someone who couldn't really do that, who would end up doing the French with some strange accent, which I think we've all heard before. Who just wouldn't know the language well enough, and especially the way it's spoken here. So I asked to do it, and so far, yeah, it's worked out well. This one won an award from Audiophile. This one not yet. I don't know about this one yet, so we'll see. Yeah, it's really, recording the audiobooks is wonderful. I mean, it's just, it's so fun. It's so challenging. So I've got to do, I had to do Magnus's Norwegian. I had to speak in Norwegian. So a little bit, like a little, couple of phrases.
Can I ask, who buys the book? I know it's in here, it's nearly all women. Is that your market? Is it more female, or do men buy it? Is this a silly question? The young or the old?
No, it's not a silly question at all. It's not a silly question at all. Yes, is the answer. Women buy my books, and women over 50, generally speaking, although men do read them as well. The truth is, though, it's because women read more than men, and they certainly read more fiction than men.
And like,
They read more fiction. I think men probably read more factual books than women.
That may be, men may read more nonfiction, but definitely women read more fiction than men do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm into more factual.
Pardon?
I'm into more factual books, but that's my background.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their taste. I know people, I had a person I know who, when Dogs came out, and I said, you're reading, he said, oh, I don't read fiction. It's like, I can't imagine a world in which someone doesn't read fiction. To me, that's like, I don't know. I just can't imagine that world. That to me is what life is. So, and
As long as it's factual.
pardon?
As long as it's factual.
Factual fiction? Well,
No, but I mean, you're writing about whales in there, so. I would read a book like that and look for ticket players.
yes, of course you would. Well, and let me know if you find some. I did have my consultant who does run the Right Whale Rescue in the Bay of Fundy, so we'll see. Maybe there's some mistakes.
I worked 26 years with fisheries and oceans on whales and seals.
You haven't read this yet?
I read your other two books,
Okay.
but I haven't read that one yet because it just came out.
Kick out of that one.
So I keep asking
Yeah.
questions, but how influential is fiction as opposed to fact? Certainly, in my field, history, it's far more fiction than fact. Fiction outweighs fact. I mean, so Walter Scott, he's completely changed the perception of the Scot and the Scots. Total rubbish. They didn't run around in clans and all that stuff, but people believe it. How powerful is fiction, but your fiction, compared to fact? I mean,
I really honestly have no idea. I will say, though, that I think storytelling is very powerful. And I think if we think of great writers, we think of through the ages, with all due respect, I'm going to guess they're not historians. I'm going to guess they're fiction writers for the most part, going back thousands of years.
but the very Charles Dickens influenced, child labor. It was fiction. I think Quebec, bluntly, is mainly fiction. All this stuff about the rich Anglophones, no rubbish. The Anglos work. No, the Anglos work. And
Especially the Irish and Scots.
oh yeah, the Scots were better, and the Scots were very feminine, by the way. There are far more Scots women came over than any other group. And people ignore that. I've got a wife and a daughter, so I'm not going to ignore it, but I don't ignore that. But I think.
Well, I mean, I mean, to answer your question, what influence does fiction have? I really couldn't tell you. I mean, I've been a teacher most of my life, teaching English literature. I think for some people, reading a great book and the world that those books open up for you are life-changing.
Oh, yeah.
So, but I don't know how you measure that. I actually heard a discussion of this with my cousin, who's a fairly well-known American writer. And her husband's even more well-known. And she had a whole discussion on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, about which they are all quite involved in. She's now in her, she must be about 60 now, maybe in her late 50s. And everybody was going, oh, well, of course we have this influence and effect. And she said, I don't know that anything I've written has had any effect on anything. Honestly, she said, I don't know if we're not all deluding ourselves. So I can't really answer that question. I can say that from plays I've done in the theater and books I've written, I've had people respond to them, and say, give a response. And likewise myself for books I've read, like I just read Demon Copperhead. I thought it was brilliant. Barbara Kingsolver. Oh my God. I don't know how that woman writes like that.
My point is, I think fiction, like something like Little Big Man, that completely changed the attitude to, before I was a little boy, it's cowboys and Indians, but along came Little Big Man.
Yeah.
And that movie, which is fiction, changed our perspective of the native people completely, but that was fiction.
Well, so did.
Well,
Mary
fiction
by
inspired
Margaret
by-
Wounded Knee, which happened before, I think, sort of led into, okay,
Yes.
now let's fictionalize this.
Yeah.
Everybody. is
Well, many
reading
books
Mary
have been
by-
made into movies, and I agree, it's storytelling. And so when it comes to movies, you reach a larger audience than a book might, because books are not as popular in terms of reading as say movies are.
And
No,
I
but
think the
it's the storytelling
story.
that we care about,
Yeah.
right? So what do we remember? We don't remember the facts and figures necessarily. We'll remember the story around those. And that's who we are as human beings. I mean, that's what we like to do, is tell stories.
Yeah, but the books you're writing, I've only read the first one, I will read the other two, but it's fiction mixed in with facts.
Yeah,
Because you do a lot of hard research.
yes.
And so you can learn a lot by reading a book like that, but basically you're reading it to enjoy the story and enjoy. the
Yeah.
character.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. I
Well,
mean, these are whodunits, but they're whodunits, I think it was the Winnipeg Free Press who said, like, murder mysteries with a conscience. And so that's how these are described. I'd say that's accurate in the sense that there's an awareness of the world we live in these books and an examination of that world, because otherwise I'm not interested in writing them. Just to write a kind of straight up whodunit for me is just not what I'm all that interested in. I'm just not. It gives me this, I get to write about whales. This one I got to write about issues that I really didn't know very much about, and this also, and so my next one, I can't tell you what that research is going to be yet, but looking forward to it. Yes,
Can I ask you a question?
of
Are
course.
there any plans to get this on TV or film?
Well, wouldn't that be
Just
nice?
the popularity of sort of mysteries and even Nordic noir.
Yeah,
In some ways, this kind of blends into that, and I just wondered if have you
Well-
sold the film rights? I guess it's.
no, I haven't. So I was approached by two producers about these two books. This one hadn't been written yet. One was very excited and got me very excited and was very excited. We had a lot of meetings and then she ghosted me. And the other one was very excited. And then we had a lot of meetings, and then effectively he told me that the books were not diverse enough. And so I got a little bit caught in that, because I actually don't agree. This has actually got quite a few diverse characters. This one maybe a little less so, but that's a whole other bigger discussion. But for him, there was not enough diversity in the books, and for me, it's as a 65-year-old white woman, it's limited what I'm able to write. Let's just leave it that, or I have permission to write. So that's obviously, we're caught in a huge discussion about that right now, big social conversation about that. So I'm really hoping, I think these books are like perfect as a series. I actually wrote, I submitted Birds That Stayed at Netflix. They had an open call I wrote what's called a Bible. So I actually wrote about a 30-page document, breaking the book down into 8 one-hour episodes, casting it, and so forth, and it didn't get through, unsurprisingly. I think something like 15,000 people submitted in Canada. Yeah. If anybody has any producers who produce these, I mean, I'm sure if I devoted, a lot of my time to this, maybe, I don't know. Like both the producers approached me, not the other way around. So this may be interesting to you or not, and if it's not, just something. There's a really interesting shift happened in the last few years with books, and one is, I'm going to say, I'm a relatively new novelist, so I obviously don't have the experience, but don't you remember those things, like those stories? Like when I wrote Birds, I contacted a fairly well-known murder mystery writer, Canadian guy. And I said, okay, so I send it to the publisher, and then they're going to assign me an editor, and I'm going to work with the editor. I don't know what I was thinking. I thought it was like New York circa 1943. And the editor and I would be working on the book together, and no, that's not what happens. At least not unless you're really famous, I think. So a lot of bigger publishing companies now, I understand, mine is not a big company, but they're a very highly regarded company. They make the authors sign a kind of agreement that you will do so many hours promoting your book on social media. We're talking big publishing companies now. And so a lot of the game is just self-promotion, like getting out there and, kind of relentlessly telling people how great your books are. And for me, if I was 40, if I was Chloe's age, I'd be out there slogging my books, posting on Instagram and everything else. I just don't have the gas in the tank anymore for that. I really don't. Life's too short. I'm 65. I don't know how much more time. I don't feel like I can do that all day long, because that's kind of what it is. And yeah, so I sort of I always thought, I wrote the things. Can someone else, sell these for me? But no, that's not how it is anymore.
Is that how Louise Penny publishes her?
No, I mean, Louise Penny is so famous now that, it's so big, she's got an agent and millions of people read her. But but even when she was starting, it was already a different game. Do you know what I mean? She started in the 90s. It was different then. It's even now, I was saying to the librarian here in Warren Heights, like these books got reviewed, in Montreal Gazette and the Globe and across the country and a couple of American publications. This one, no. I don't know why. Just it's a much harder to get the attention, which is just weird because it's so topical. It's
the third series.
yeah, I know, and so I was surprised too, but so it's really, and it's not like me. It's everybody's got to get out. There's a lot of books coming out. Everybody's got to get, and people I think are actually not reading so much, to be honest.
They're looking at movies.
They're looking at Netflix. They're listening to audiobooks. I know we think people are reading a lot, but I think actually they're not so much.
We're reading.
Yeah,
Yeah, I read a lot.
yeah. So, but I had a friend years ago, a playwright friend, and because as a playwright, like the only person who makes less money than a Canadian novelist is a Canadian playwright. And and I guess even less than them, a Canadian poet, right? Like it's laughable. We'll all laugh because it is laughable.
That's why Edward switched the books.
Yeah, well,
Other than
like it's just, and of course there are people who make a very good living. I'm not saying there aren't writers, but there's not that many that do sort of a, star 10 or 20. Anyway, so a friend of mine, Vivian Laxwell, who's a wonderful, brilliant playwright. And we were sort of having a little bitch fest. We're talking 15 years ago at least. And I was going, oh, you don't make any money doing this. And she was doing a reading of a new play of hers at Playwrights Workshop in Montreal. And she looked at me and she said, this is how I feel about it. She said, I can't believe I'm going to this place where I'm going to sit and read, a monologue from my new play for 12 minutes. I'm going to talk. And she said, and, anywhere from 20 to 100 people are going to be sitting in this room listening to me. And she said, it's a privilege that, it's a privilege to have experience. So I always tell her, so it's a privilege to be here with you. It's not, it's just, I'm just stating some facts about about book selling and writing books in the world right now, but it's a privilege to be here. I really appreciate you're all coming out too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got some here?
I do, I have some copies.